Hello everyone. Today we will discuss about topic that is muscle contraction. For explanation of muscle contraction, there is a theory and that is known as sliding filament theory. According to this theory, there are two types of protein or filament. That is actin, or we can say that light filament or heavy filament. Light filament, that is thin filament, heavy filament, thick filament. According to sliding filament theory, जो thick filament will remain stable and thin filament will slide over thick filament. Now let's talk about these two types of filament. First, that light filament is actin protein and that thick filament or heavy filament is myosin protein. Two types of protein, light and heavy. Light one is actin and heavy one or thick one is myosin. Now let's talk about actin protein. Actin protein is made up of different types of protein and here is its structure. First, G actin. G, here G represents globular, or we can say that spherical in structure. Here single spherical structure is known as G actin, and that continuous chain of G actin, or we can say that repeated numbers of G actin will form F actin. G actin means globular actin, single spherical structure, that is G actin, and continuous repeated chain of G actin will form filament, and that is known as filament actin, F actin. G actin, now that continuous chain of G actin will form F actin, and that thread-like structure is known as tropomyosin. First, G actin will form F actin, and that continuous chain or thread-like structure over F actin is known as tropomyosin. And there is another type of protein which is very important for muscle contraction, that is known as troponin. First, G actin, which will form filamentous actin. Second one is tropomyosin, which is continuous thread-like structure, and last one is troponin, which presents at regular interval over that F actin. And that troponin protein is made up of three subunits, very important, three subunits, that is TT, TI and TC, where part of troponin which is attached with tropomyosin is known as TT, part of troponin which inhibit active site over actin is known as TI, and that part of troponin where calcium is going to attach is known as TC. I am going to revise it again. First, actin protein, that is light protein. It consists of different type of protein. First is G actin. Continuous structure of G actin will form F actin, and that thread-like structure is known as tropomyosin, and the protein which is present at regular interval which is known as troponin, and troponins consist of three types of subunit, that is known as TT, TI and TC. Now let's talk about another type of protein, that is known as myosin protein, which is heavy filament. Heavy filament consists of basically two parts, that is first one is light part, tail part, and that heavy one is known as heavy part. Light part, that is known as LMM, because of its less molecular weight is known as light myromyosin. G actin will form, or we can say that F actin is a polymer of G actin. Similarly, that myosin protein is a polymer of myromyosin. Second one, HMM, heavy part, heavy myromyosin, and its head region is consist of two things. First, actin binding site means that part of myosin which is going to attach over actin over its active site. Because according to sliding filament theory, what did I discuss? That myosin and actin, where actin will slide over myosin, so they need to be a connection between them. And myosin, that part should be attached with actin's active part. And for the contraction of these, for the contraction of muscles, there is a need of energy, and we know that energy should be required in the form of ATP, that is known as adenosine triphosphate, and that energy will be provided by another part that is known as ATPase. Means ASE means enzyme which will degrade or which will break ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and ATP will be converted into adenosine diphosphate with inorganic phosphate. Let's revise it again. For contraction of muscle, there is a theory that is known as sliding filament theory. There are two types of protein, light one, heavy one. Light is known as actin protein, heavy is known as myosin protein. Actin protein is consist of different types of protein, that is known as G-actin. Continuous repetition of G-actin will form F-actin. The thread-like structure is known as tropomyosin, and troponin is present at regular interval. Troponin consists of three types of protein, TT, TI and TC. Another protein is myosin, which is again consists of two parts, LMM, light meromyosin, HMM, heavy meromyosin, and that curve between them is known as cross arm. Head part is consist of actin binding site, means that part of myosin which is going to attach with actin, and another which will act like an ATPase, means its substrate will be ATP and it will convert into ADP and inorganic phosphate. Thank you so much.